MJ, why don't we do it like this?
It's gonna be in the view of this camera.
ثانية خد هاي هات هاي this one is better. The phone quality is way better than the live. I know, it's expensive. Even the audio is better on this. Better. And look, if you zoom it like this. Yeah, we'll do it at your grandma's house. Yeah, dude. I'll film it. We're like practicing in the middle.
دلوقتي 24 بيعطي صوت القواعد.
MJ. شوف لي قديش I'm aware man.
Peace be upon the parched lips. Peace be upon the pallid bodies. Peace be upon the gushing bloods. Peace be upon the dismembered limbs. Peace be upon the heads raised upon the lances. Peace be upon Qasim, son of Hassan, he who was struck upon the head, he whose armor was stripped, he who called upon his uncle Hussein, and after arriving fell upon him like an eagle, seeing him fight his last breaths, and carving the sands of Karbala with his hands and feet, fighting to stay alive. Peace be upon the altruistic young man who couldn't bear see his siblings and relatives die before him, and bear any more of this life. Peace be upon the one who saw death sweeter than honey, when it was for truth, for Allah, and for his Imam. Peace be upon the one who chose martyrdom over the dunya and marched to death far faster than death came to him. Peace be upon Qasim, son of Hassan. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Verily, we wish we were amongst you, for we would have achieved a great victory. Please help me welcome our dear scholar Sheikh Mahdi Rastani with a salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
One more loud salawat, please. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. فإذا جاءت الطامة الكبرى يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان ما سعى وبرزت الجحيم لمن يرى فأما من طغى وآثر الحياة الدنيا فإن الجحيم هي المأوى وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات الله. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Tonight the topic that we will be discussing, inshallah, is the topic of whether or not we should fear God. The question seems like a very simple question, but beneath it lie many other questions that might come to mind. The reality is that the human being, as he goes through life, experiences a host of different emotions. These emotions that the human being experiences, some of them he might feel more welcoming towards, he might want to experience. Some of them he might work hard sometimes to prevent from experiencing. Maybe if they asked a human being if he wanted to experience sadness every now and then in his life, the answer typically would be a negative answer. However, we find that each of these emotions that the human being experiences has a role to play in his day-to-day life. Maybe if this person, the only thing he ever experienced in his life was happiness and never got a taste of what sadness even feels like, maybe he wouldn't really know what happiness is actually like at the end of the day, and maybe he wouldn't be able to prepare for the time that happiness comes his way. So every single emotion that the human being feels, in reality, has a role to play in his day-to-day life. If you ask people, for example, whether they would want to experience the emotion of fear, normally they would say no. Normally they would say that is an emotion that they would rather simply avoid and never have to deal with. However, when you look into our day-to-day life, you find that it is the emotion of fear that protects the human being from all of the dangers that he finds around himself. When you come home after being out all day, and before eating food or shaking hands with your loved ones and so on and so forth, you wash your hands. This is out of fear. That fear of maybe a virus, maybe a bacteria being on your hand, making you sick, making you ill, so on and so forth. When you get in your car, you put on your seat belt, that seat belt that is going to protect you in the case of an accident. In reality, that is fear that is working behind the scenes. And therefore, without fear, the human being would immediately become vulnerable to tens, if not hundreds, of dangers. Without fear, a human being would be defenseless in the face of the dangers of this world. I don't know if you've ever witnessed or experienced a child that is so young, he doesn't feel fear at all. So while the parents are at home, maybe he goes into the backyard, finds a snake or something, starts to play with the snake, starts to bring the snake into the house. The moment he brings the snake into the house, he feels like it's a toy he's playing with, whereas the parents are screaming and running around thinking, what have you done to yourself? The reason being, he doesn't have a sense of fear yet. And so because of that, he's putting himself constantly in danger. When he wants to cross the street, the parents might look left and right 5 times each way, but this little boy could care less. He wants to skip across the street as if it's some game. Without fear, all of a sudden, all these dangers in the world become a problem in our lives, and we make ourselves vulnerable to them. This we understand. The discussion starts to become a little bit more complex, however, where when this fear that you talk about is not related and attributed to the dangers of the world that we live in, rather to a being and an entity that is not supposed to be scary or dangerous to begin with, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you attribute fear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as sometimes the verses of the Quran clearly do, and we will talk about that tonight, well, the discussion becomes a little bit more complex because God fundamentally is not supposed to be a dangerous thing. It's one thing for you to tell your child, be scared of the snake, because a snake can fundamentally be dangerous. Be careful when you're crossing the street, well, because the street can fundamentally be dangerous. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran seems to tell us He's not only not scary and dangerous, not only that, He's not even neutral. He's merciful and He's supposed to be there to take care of you. Hence, this raises many questions in the mind of the human being. Then why is it that the Quran speaks about fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And because of this dichotomy and this contrast and this contradiction that comes to our minds, sometimes you'll find people who will preach the religion of Islam and the message of Islam without any concept of fear in it at all. They'll tell you, listen, what these scholars say, and sometimes they quote this hadith and that verse of the Quran, fear this, fear that. This doesn't have any root in reality. God is not a scary thing, therefore there's no need for you to be fearful of Him. Sometimes they'll go even further. They'll tell you, listen, what kind of a religion is this, and what kind of spirituality is this, where you are fearing God and doing things out of fear? if you were truly a spiritual person, you would worship God out of His love and because you feel like He is worthy of this worship, and not because of the fear of the consequences of your deeds and so on and so forth. In fact, this is one of the main issues that atheists raise as it relates to people of faith. They say the reason why you guys do good things and stay away from bad things is not because you're foundationally good people. It's because you're scared and you're fearful. So because you're scared and you're fearful, you decide to do what? You decide to do the good things. Otherwise, if they left you on your own and there was no faith around to make you fear God, you wouldn't be doing these good things at the end of the day. So this person comes to you and says, listen, I don't believe in the type of religion that tells you to worship out of fear. This is another question that adds to the complexity of this topic. And beyond this, sometimes we have this question ourselves. Does God even have to bring into the story the idea of consequences, punishment, discipline, and so forth? Couldn't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply spoke of the rewards of the good deeds that you and I do? Wouldn't that have been a better system and a better incentive for me to do the right thing? So instead of coming to me and telling me Salatul Fajr is wajib, and if you miss it, there is punishment, and if you don't pray it on purpose, there is punishment for you, couldn't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply told me, if you pray Salatul Fajr, you will receive this mansion in heaven, and these blessings in heaven, and these fruits in heaven? Why talk about punishment and consequences anyways? And many other questions that come to mind in this regard. Therefore, tonight, we will delve into this topic by posing the following questions. Number one, if God is not a dangerous being and a dangerous entity, then why is it that we find traces in Quran and in Hadith more than once or twice of a concept of fearing God? Number two, if we typically do not move towards something that is scary and dangerous, then why is it that the verses of the Quran tell us to flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Number three, if I fear God, what does this look like on a practical level? How can I know if I foundationally fear God? Does fearing God mean I sit in the corner of my house and my hands are constantly shaking, or is there some other practical sign to tell whether I fear God or I do not? Number four, when God speaks of those who fear Him, speaks of His special servants who khafa maqama rabbihi, have fear of the status of their Lord. Are these servants of His perfect servants who never disobey Him and never make any mistakes? Or is it the case that you can have the fear of God in your heart and still from time to time make mistakes and maybe commit sins? Number five, what is the greater level of fearing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you find in the status and in the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, specifically when they wanted to approach the time of Salat? Number six, is it true that worshipping Allah out of fear is not very spiritual and is not recommended in our faith, and that one should only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of his love towards Him, or that he finds Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala worthy of worship? And number seven, and finally, what did Imam al-Rida say and how did he react when a man came to him and told him of his friend who had committed the sin of murder multiple times, but told him that he had lost hope in the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Before we can continue, if I can ask the AV brothers to turn down the echo or the gain a little bit, inshallah we can continue. One more loud salawat, please. ثالثة على حب الزهراء. Let us begin from here. Does the Quran speak of the idea of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The reality is you can't go far in reciting the verses of the Quran or going through our literature, whether it is Quran or Hadith, without coming across some concept and some idea of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not easy to go through this. The reality is, if you were to open up the Quran and recite only the first page and the second page, yes, So for some of us Muslims, that's the most we will ever recite from the verses of the Quran, of course, yes? Surah Al-Fatiha and that second page, and only that second page because it's printed in a smaller font and it's only 5 verses and nothing more. Otherwise, we won't continue beyond that. But the reality is, even if you read just page number 1 and page number 2, Surah Al-Fatiha, and the first page from Surah Al-Baqarah, immediately you come across the idea of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the Quran says, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Immediately there is this idea that there needs to be between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taqwa, wiqaya. You need to protect yourself from the consequences of certain things when it comes to your relationship and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you had not even gotten started reciting the Quran, and immediately the Quran is talking about what? There are people who are muttaqeen, and these are the special servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, great. If God was dangerous and scary, the discussion would be very easy. We would point to God and say, here, he's a scary person, stay away from him. You need to protect yourself from him, and the discussion would be over. The problem is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't introduce himself as someone who is scary, who wants to hurt you, who wants to take something away from you. In fact, he introduces himself as the opposite of this constantly. So if you look into Surah Al-Hadid, the final verses of that surah, which the narrations say the people of Akhir al-Zaman will understand the meaning of these verses better than the people of other times. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak about himself? He mentions different adjectives, different attributes. And one of those attributes, or 2 of them, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always uses together is what? Al-Malikul Quddus. Al-Malik, the one who is powerful, the one who owns a kingdom, the one who is in charge. And immediately afterwards, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? Al-Quddus. He is the one who's holy. And the Quran has an emphasis of using these 2 together. You read this, hear this also at the beginning of Surah Al-Jumu'ah as well. Yes. يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ الْمَلِكِ الْقُدُّوسِ. The moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about his authority, he also touches on what? By the way, this person who has authority, he is also kind, he is also compassionate. He doesn't use that authority in a wrong way. This is Al-Quddus. He's holy, he's divine. So he's not going to use that authority the way a normal king would use that authority. Okay, so then if on one hand the Quran is telling us fear Allah, on the other hand the Quran is telling us that God is not scary and he's not dangerous, well then how would we understand these 2 points at the same time? If we can please recite a salawat, please. The reality is the Quran doesn't speak about fearing him in just one way, because there's multiple terminology that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses for this as well. Sometimes he says, ittaqullah, have taqwa. Sometimes he says you should have khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes he says you have khawf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes he says you have to have rahba of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your heart. So not just in one way, in a multitude of different ways, God is speaking of some idea of fear. But the reality is, when you dig deeper into the verses of the Quran, though the Quran says fear Allah, you realize that this is at a certain level that the Quran is speaking for the layman. Meaning for the layman who doesn't want to get into the philosophical details of things, it's easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, fear me. If you're a good servant, you go to heaven. If you're a bad servant, you end up with the punishments. Yes? But at a deeper level, you start to understand that reward and punishment that the Quran speaks of is not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing things. It's you who's doing that. So the Quran will come and tell you, listen, the punishment on the day of judgment, it's not God looking at you and saying, I'm not happy with what you did, so now you're going to get punished. On the day of judgment, it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looking at you and saying, you did what I told you to do, so now I'm happy with you. Here's your reward. Yes, sometimes the Quran speaks of it in that way, because the Quran has to speak in such a way where people over thousands of years can all understand it. Not everyone's at the same level. Yes, the people of the time of the Prophet, some of the basic concepts they might have struggled to grasp. Hence the Quran sometimes speaks in this way. And then some other times the Quran goes deeper into the reality of what is punishment and what is reward. So this verse of the Quran that all of you and I have heard, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. But if you pay attention to what the Quran is saying, does the Quran say the one who does good, Allah rewards him, and the one who does bad, Allah punishes him? Or did the Quran say the one who does good and the one who does bad, the good and bad deed themselves, they will see that on that day? He said, وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ. This person will see the deed itself. So the Quran is teaching you and I that when you perform a deed, good or bad, this deed has two aspects and two realities to it. It has a physical reality to it and it has a spiritual reality to it. The physical reality is bound by time and place. You do it at a particular place and at a particular time. The physical reality does not extend beyond that moment. You made a hateful comment, a disrespectful comment to a loved one. That comment of yours physically lives in a particular time and place, and that's it. But then this deed of yours has a spiritual reality to it as well. The spiritual reality is not bound by time and place. The spiritual reality is tied to your soul. Wherever your soul goes, that spiritual reality accompanies your soul. You can't run away from it. It's always tied to you. That's why the Quran says, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ رَهِينَةٌ. Everyone is tied to their deeds. They can't run away from their deeds. The physical reality of things you can run away from very easily. You do this wrong thing here, you move to another state, nobody has any idea. But the Quran says, no, that deed had a spiritual reality. It's tied to your soul. And so when you show up on the Day of Judgment, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? He reveals to you the spiritual reality of that deed that you had done. Now, if that deed was a good deed, the spiritual reality shows up as a blessing for you. If it was a bad deed, the spiritual reality of that deed shows up as a punishment. So it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, na'udhu billah, snapping his fingers and making hellfire appear all of a sudden. It is you who through your deeds create deeds that have a negative spiritual reality. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who brings you into the next world and reveals to you the negative spiritual reality of your deeds. Yes. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala part of this overall process? Yes. But who is the determining factor? It's you. Hence, at one level, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fear me. At another level, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, you don't have to fear me. Yes, I'm the judge who's presiding over that day where you will see the spiritual reality of your deeds. I'm that person. I'm overseeing this process. But in reality, I'm not the scary one. You're the scary one. You're the one that you have to fear. People say sometimes, should I fear Allah or should I love Allah? You should love Allah. And then you should fear your deeds. You should fear what you can do with your own free will. You should fear the spiritual realities that you can bring into existence through your deeds. But now, if the Quran is speaking to thousands of people across history and across tens of different cultures and so on and so forth, the Quran is not always going to go into all of this depth and detail. So the Quran might say, ittaqullah, yes, fear Allah, have khashya of Allah, yes, and so on and so forth. My servants are those who have ishfaq towards me. They are fearful towards me. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is part of this process. When you didn't study for your exam and you came to take the exam and then you were fearful of how the teacher was going to grade you, are you fearful of the teacher who's overseeing this process, or are you fearful of failing the grade that you're in? You're fearful of failing that grade. Yes, the teacher is part of this process. Hence, by mistake, you might sit there and say, oh, this teacher is so scary. Teacher is not scary. The principal is not scary. The law that you broke is scary. But the principal is part of overseeing this process. So you might sit there and say, oh, I just hope the principal doesn't find out. If the principal finds out, we're going to be in so much. You fear the principal, but in reality, it's because you broke the law. It's that negative effect that you have to be fearful of. Hence you find in the narrations, Imam al-Sadiq says something very beautiful. He says, listen, if you really want to understand how your relationship is supposed to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is what it's supposed to be like. Husnul dhanni billah, thinking well of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the following. He says, "An la tarjua illallah," that when it comes to hope, you have no hope except from Allah, meaning you don't count on yourself too much. Okay, what about fear? He says, "Wala takhafa illa dhanbak," and that you don't fear anything but your sin and your deed. Well, who made that deed into? You made that deed into the reality. Is there a concept of fearing God in Islam? Absolutely. Is it directly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I have to be fearful of? If you want to become technical, no. It is your deeds that you have to be fearful of. It is that free will that you have in your hand that God knows what you might do with it tomorrow. That's what you have to be fearful of. That's what you have to keep in mind. And this is exactly why the Quran tells us something that you never hear when you are fearful of someone. The Quran says, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Wait a minute. If I'm supposed to be scared of God, what meaning does it have, go run towards Him? When was the last time you had an enemy that you were scared of and you decided, well, I'm going to run towards him? You never run towards something you're scared of. There's never an illness that you're scared of and you say, well, let me go find where the illness is. Let me contract that illness. Yes, let me take it on. No, you run away from it. But the Quran says what? فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Run towards Allah. What does this mean? This means from the very beginning, you weren't supposed to be fearful of Him. He wasn't the main thing you were supposed to be fearful of. You were supposed to be fearful of your own deeds. But that's not normally the case when it comes to other relationships that we have and other things that we fear. Okay, great. Shaykh, I understand. I'm supposed to be fearful of the consequences of my deed. What does that mean from a practical level? Very easy. Practically, the Quran in Surah Nazi'at has told us exactly what it means to be fearful of God. Somehow, some way, some people have this idea in their mind that being fearful of God means what? You sit in the corner of your house, your hands are shaking or something. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want this fear. That's not what He's talking about. So what's the sign that I can see in my life? Do I have the fear of God in my life or not? Very easy. What does Surah Nazi'at say? فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الطَّامَّةُ الْكُبْرَى. When the day of judgment comes, يَوْمَئِذٍ يَتَذَكَّرُ الْإِنسَانُ مَا سَعَى. Every human being starts to remember what he did. فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ. But as it relates to those servants who were fearful of the status of their Lord. Okay, and what did they used to do? وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. You know what they used to do? They used to forbid themselves from doing wrong. The wording of the Quran is very delicate here. وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ. They used to forbid themselves. Okay, they used to forbid themselves. Does that mean they never made mistakes? No, it actually means every now and then they might have made mistakes. نَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. The only thing these guys had, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking of these special servants of His, He says the only thing these guys had, you know what it was? They had enough fear in their hearts when they came across something that was wrong. They never just gave themselves a free and green light to just engage in it and don't worry about it at all. At some level, they forbid themselves from doing it. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if he has enough fear to this level, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَىٰ. You know where he's going to end up? He's going to end up in heaven. How often do you see people say, it's so difficult to get into heaven. I don't know, this, that. The Quran says, listen, are you nahan nafsa anil hawa? When you come across wrong, come across sin, do you just jump into it? Or for a second, do you sit back and say, I shouldn't do this? After you do it, do you feel guilty and come back? That's as simple as that. If you're like that, you are nahan nafsa anil hawa, which means you are part of this group of khafa maqama rabbihi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not sitting there and saying, yes, go sit in the room and shake all day. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you that when you come across sin, you say, no, I'm not going to engage in this. Now, is it possible when you do nahi of someone else or yourself, is it possible that you or that person engages still in that deed? Absolutely. Doesn't the Quran say, "Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar"? If you pray, it will forbid you from doing wrong things. Well, I pray and I do wrong things. You pray and you do wrong things. So the Quran is saying, at least do nahi, at least forbid yourself. Is that too much that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking from us? That's not too much that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking from us. So you find in the Quran, every time fear of Allah comes along, which means what? Taking on a sense of accountability for my deeds. Not just going into life and saying, I'll do whatever I want to do. Taking on a sense of accountability. Whenever that comes along, you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately says, these people will have maghfirah and forgiveness. So it turns out they're not perfect. So it turns out they make mistakes. It says, "Man khashya ar-Rahmana bil-ghayb," the one who fears Allah when no one else is around, فَبَشِّرْهُ بِمَغْفِرَةٍ, tell him we're going to forgive him. Wait a second, I thought if he's going to fear God, he's not going to do anything wrong. No, the Quran says he'll do some things wrong. But what? Because he forbids himself, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there to grab him. Is this too much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking from you and I? Otherwise, the type of fear that sometimes people have, that I'm just fearful of God. Sometimes you see this, by the way. If you go bury someone in the graveyard, sometimes people who are around you, they will react in this way. When they put the body of this person into the grave, all of a sudden you see everybody's crying, so on and so forth. Why are you fearful? I'm just fearful. It's just scary. Okay, this type of fear, as long as it doesn't bring accountability, is not admirable in Islam. God doesn't want you to just be scared just for the sake of it. He wants you to take that fear and say, oh Allah, I know there can be negative consequences to my deeds, so I'm going to forbid myself from some wrong things. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Otherwise, Ali ibn Abi Talib talks about this in Nahj al-Balagh. He says there are some people, yakrahul maut, he doesn't like death. But that's it, he just doesn't like it. Will he ever do anything to remove that dislike and to prepare him for his own death? No. Just he dislikes death. Just when he comes to the graveyard, he says, oh my God, it's going to be so difficult. Then when he goes back, he's like, yeah, I'm just going to still do the same things. Ali ibn Abi Talib says, Baba, if you fear God, take a little bit of that fear in your heart and say, okay, I'm going to at least forbid myself. You don't have to be perfect. Nobody said anyone has to be perfect. At least take it and say, I'm going to forbid myself from doing this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want someone just to fear him just for the sake of it. No, he wants a sense of accountability. Now someone might say, well, Shaykh, you're saying that the Quran wants us to fear Allah, so I have to live a life of fear all the time. No, because the Quran tells us that the fear that one has of Allah, i.e. fearing the consequences to his own deeds at a deeper level, yes? The fear that he has of Allah and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are two sides of the same coin. In normal relationships, when you fear someone more, that means they're less merciful towards you. That's why you fear them more. In Islam, in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more you fear God, that means there's more mercy coming your way. So if someone reads the verses of the Quran and says, yeah, Shaykh, these verses are very scary. Say, oh, so you got scared. Yeah, I heard about, hellfire, so on and so forth. I got scared. The immediate result, the immediate next step from that is, if you got scared, then you don't have to worry anymore because God's mercy is there for you. Immediately the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns into tranquility and calmness. Because if you really feared God, well then immediately the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to come your way. This is why the Quran says, Allahu nazzala ahsan al-hadith kitaban mutashabiha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down this Quran, kitaban mutashabiha, has multiple interpretations. Mathaniya taqsha'irru minhu juludul ladina yakhshawna rabbahum. The people who fear Allah, when they go through the verses of the Quran, their skin starts to tremble and shake. Like they're really fearful. Okay, but the moment this happens, then they remind themselves of what? I feared him, that means his mercy is coming my way. ثُمَّ تَلِينُ جُلُودُهُمْ وَقُلُوبُهُمْ إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Then immediately their hearts become calm. The moment you fear God, if it's true, genuine fear, meaning you worry about the consequences of your own deeds, immediately that changes into what? Calm and tranquility. This is the beauty of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In no other relationship does this hold true. Only in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this hold true. The more you fear God, the more merciful God has promised to be to you. That's how it works. Now imagine if you go out there and you take accountability for your deeds in a normal court of law. And you show up to the judge and say, Judge, you know what? I want to just cut this short. I actually did this deed and that I'm taking accountability. Yes? Will they be more merciful towards you? No. They say, Alhamdulillah, thank you for saving our time. The next case was actually waiting outside the door. Take him. His sentencing will be next week. Take him. I don't want to talk to him. Only in the court of Allah do you come and take accountability. And they say, you know what? We're wiping off the crime altogether. It's only in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works like this. Recite salawat, please. So one might say, well, Shaykh, I understand. So this fear that I have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not really from Him. It's from the consequences of my own deeds. That's what I have to be careful of. The more I fear Him, the more merciful He is going to be towards me, so on and so forth. But why, Shaykh, why go through all this trouble? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak about this fear? Why tell us about the consequences of our deeds? Why can't He take a positive approach? If I could count how many times I've heard this comment. Why can't God just take a positive approach? Okay, Habibi, what's a positive approach? Positive approach, Shaykh. Why can't He just sit there and say, listen, Salatul Fajr is wajib. If you pray, you're going to have grapes the size of your palm in heaven. You're going to have the best meals you can think about in heaven. You're going to have this mansion in heaven. You're going to have this. It's a positive approach. Forget about the consequences, the discipline, punishment, so on and so forth. Yes? Talk to us about the rewards. Wouldn't that be easier? It would be easier. The problem is one little problem. It doesn't work. Not with human beings, at least. And one great scholar, he draws a very beautiful analogy just to explain that this doesn't work at all. He says, listen, you know what the difference is between Salatul Fajr and Salatul Layl? It's not that one of them has a great reward and the other one doesn't have a great. They both have really great rewards. Doesn't the Quran say in Surah Al-Isra, Salatul Layl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared for the one who does Salatul Layl things that people have not even imagined. Okay, doesn't get better than that. But this great scholar, he says, go and ask how many people pray Salatul Layl and how many people pray their Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Isha, Maghrib. Why doesn't God just tell us the positive? He did. You don't listen to Him. He already tried that. And out of His mercy, He speaks also of the consequences, because that's what will get you to move. Yes, He's not harsh though. He's not going to sit there and say, you make one mistake, you're done. Don't do this, don't do that. Yes, He will tell you, listen, even if you made 1,000,000 mistakes, your mercy, my mercy will still be there for you. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fear me, He's talking about the consequences to these deeds. There is, however, and we're going to take the discussion up a notch now. There is, however, those times where the Quran speaks about fearing Allah and He is talking about fearing Himself. Not your deeds, not none of this. When is that? There are times in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there are some servants, they reach a certain level. It's not fear of the consequences of their deeds or punishment, and that is why they fear us. It's not that. You know what it is? They just understand who God is. So the Quran says the angels يَخَافُونَ رَبَّهُمْ مِنْ فَوْقِهِمْ. They fear Allah. But wait a second. Can an angel ever do anything wrong? An angel can never do anything wrong. An angel's perfect. Angel will always obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Quran says يَخَافُونَ. They have khawf. The Quran says, لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية. It's going to implode from the fear of Allah. Does a mountain ever have a chance to do anything wrong, to fear the consequences of his deeds? And yet the Quran says they fear Allah. This is the second level, the higher level of fearing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means it's not so much fear in and of itself or worrying about punishment. It's not that. It is that this person is in awe so much, he displays signs of fear. This is a different thing. Most human beings go through their life, they never experience this. And this is the fear that the Ahl Bayt had. Why do you think when it came time for Salat, all of a sudden, Imam al-Sajjad is going pale? Why is he going pale all of a sudden? Oh, because he's still worried God is going to punish him? No. Because he understands who he's going to talk to. Now, you and I don't understand this, so it's difficult for us. Okay, Sheikh, when it comes to this part of the discussion, there's always this guy who comes after the lecture. Sheikh, I want to fear Allah in that way. How do I get there? Here's the thing. You cannot get to that level unless first you go through the basic level of fearing God. You have to graduate from that level to the next level. You can't just go to the next level. Oh, I understand who God is. I worship God because I understand who He is. No, you think you do that. That's not true. Sheikh, I've heard this narration. Imam Ali said, in fact, more than one Imam has this narration. Yes? That the people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are of three groups. Yes? That the one who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear of hellfire, yes, this is the worship of the servants. Ibadatul abid. The one who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the hope of getting into heaven, this is ibadatul tujjar. This guy is trying to work his way towards heaven. And then there is, Sheikh, I've heard there's ibadatul ahra. I want that one. I want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He's worthy of being worshipped. Or some narrations say hubban lahu. Or some narrations say shukran lahu. Yes, just because of who God is and what He's done for me and so on and so forth. Here's the thing. Because the fear of Allah at this basic level, unfortunately, has gotten a very bad rep in our communities. Oh, don't worship God out of fear, this, that. No, you can't reach that higher level unless you begin from worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while fearing the consequences of your deeds. You know how we know this? Listen, it doesn't get better and higher than the Ahlul Bayt. Yes? No one gets higher than the Ahlul Bayt. Okay, great. What if we told you that the Ahlul Bayt also feared the Day of Judgment? No, Shaykh, I heard the Ahlul Bayt, they worship Allah out of the love that He has for them. Yes, they worship Allah out of the love that they have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's because they graduated from the first level, not that they don't have the first level. Big difference. When you go to college and you're learning some algorithms, you are leaning on a foundation because in the second grade or the first grade you learn 2 + 2 = 4. When you go to college, 2 + 2 = 4 is still a thing. That was the step you put your foot on and then went to college to get into some algorithm. We're still at 2 + 2 = 4. And then we're like, oh, I want to learn this algorithm. They say, yeah, but you didn't learn 2 + 2 = 4. You still don't know that if you don't pray, there's a spiritual reality that's created that you have to deal with and all this stuff. That's where you and I are. You have to graduate from that level. Therefore, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear of the consequences of my deeds, brothers and sisters, is a very spiritual thing to do. Yes, sometimes in life, the human being might be able to go beyond this level. He might be able to reach that point where Ali ibn Abi Talib says, Ya Allah, I don't worship you because of your heaven or your hellfire. I worship you because you are ahlan lidhalik, because you are worthy of being worshipped. But you have to start from this level. Can't skip this level. And this is the most difficult level to get through. You know how we can say the Ahlul Bayt also feared God even at this first level? Because in the most sacrificing story of all that you read in Surah Al-Insan, what do we read? وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. These are the verses of the Quran, yes? And then immediately afterwards they say, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. We only do it because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. We don't need any of this stuff from you guys. Immediately afterwards, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? Quoting the Ahlul Bayt. He says, إِنَّا نَخَافُ مِن رَبِّنَا. We fear from Allah يَوْمًا عَبُوسًا قَمْطَرِيرًا. So the Ahlul Bayt had this fear, but they graduated. Yes, when you graduate, then you may not do things out of this fear. Doesn't mean you're not carrying that fear in your back pockets. You and I, we have to start from here. Stop listening to this idea, oh, it's not spiritual. You should worship Allah out of, just His love. And no. Worship Allah because there are consequences to your deeds. Inshallah, when you graduate from this level, yes, you can reach a level of humanity where you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just because of who He is. But you and I and the average person, we're not even close to that. Because even at this basic level, we don't listen to God. This is a level I have to graduate from. So the fear of Allah plays a very big role in building the spirituality of the human being. However, this same fear, brothers and sisters, if it were to go too far, then Islam also has a problem with that too. You can't get so fearful that then you sit back and you say, well, I'm a done deal. There's no more hope in me. And typically, there's times in life where this will happen. Sometimes shaitan will come to you. Specifically, if you're struggling with the same sin over and over again, he'll come to you and say, listen, Baba, it's over. Just stop trying. You're embarrassing yourself. Now, people are saying this person one time, he started praying, then he stopped praying, and now you want to start praying again? Is that what you want to do? Yeah, that's what God expects from him. But this is how shaitan says it. You did this already once. Now you went back on your own word. Now you're going to go back and pray, make another promise to God again? Yeah, I'm going to go back, make another promise to God again. That's what I'm saying. What do you suggest? Just stay in this sin? Is that a better way out of this? This is what shaitan will tell. Therefore, Imam al-Sadiq has a beautiful line. He says, "Urjullaha raja'an." Have the type of hope in Allah, but don't take it too far. La yujarri'uka ala ma'asih. Don't let that hope take you so far that when you come across sins, you say, it's not a big deal. Let's just do it and move on. And he says, have fear of Allah. Khifatan, the type of fear, la yu'yisuka min rahmatih, that never makes you lose hope in His mercy. It's interesting. There are people, brothers and sisters, committed much greater sins than you and I. And when the Imams came across them, they said, okay, you did these terrible things. You have to get up and start making up for them. You have to make amends for them. But you can't just lose hope. Sins that you and I will never commit in our lives. Never. There's a companion of Imam al-Rida. He said, I have a friend. He knew Imam al-Rida on one side. On the other side, he had a friend who worked for Harun al-Rashid. Yes? Sometimes you come across people, they're extroverts like this. They know everyone, everywhere. I don't know if you have friends like this. He always knows a guy for something. So he knew on this hand, Imam al-Rida and all of this. On the other hand, he had friends who were working for who? Were working for Harun al-Rashid. He says, one day I came to my friend who used to work for Harun al-Rashid. It was the month of Ramadan. I saw in the middle of Ramadan, he's having a feast. He doesn't care. I turned to him, I said, Fulan, today's Ramadan, you can't be eating like this. He said, listen, my situation has gotten so bad, you don't even have to worry about me anymore. I'm a done deal. He said, no, but you should still fear Allah, try your best, stay away, so on. He said, no, listen, you don't know who I am. I've done things, if I tell you, you'll also look at me and just write me off. Just let me be. Don't worry about me. He insisted. His friend who worked for Harun Rashid started to tell him. He said, listen, let me tell you my life story. You know what happened? I used to work for Harun Rashid. As part of this working that I used to do for Harun al-Rashid, one day Harun al-Rashid came to me. He called me to his courtyard and he asked me to profess to him my loyalty. So I stood there in front of him. I said, "O Khalifa, I am fully loyal to you." He looked at me. He said, "Great, wonderful, you can go now." I started to go home. As I was on my way to home, all of a sudden I saw he sent one of the workers. He said, "Come back, Harun al-Rashid wants to see you again." Wants to see me again. I was just with him. He wants to see you again. He said, I came back into the courtyard. Harun Rashid said, why don't you profess your loyalty to us? He said, "Oh Khalifa, all of my loyalty, everything that I have belongs to you. And I'm telling you this is true." He said, "Okay, great, go." He says, I went towards my home. Before I could get home again another worker came. He said, "Harun Rashid is calling you. Come back." I was just with him. Come back. He wants to see you again. This time I realized Harun al-Rashid is not pleased with the level of loyalty that I'm professing to him. He's expecting more from me. So then this time I went and I sat in front of him. He said, profess your loyalty to us. He said, listen, I'm willing to do anything for you. I said, this is good. He said, you're not going home anymore. I said, why? He said, I have a duty for you. I have a task for you. He said, he sent me with his workers to a prison. I went into the prison. This worker turned to me. He said, the Khalifa said, when I get you here, you're responsible of putting an end to the life of these people who are in the prison. He wanted you to take care of this. He says, I was completely ignorant of the presence of Allah. I started. I took the life of one person, 2 people, 3 people. I continued. It came to this old man. This old man looked at me. His hands were shivering. He just said one line to me. He said, listen, we are the children of the Prophet. Our lineage goes back to the Prophet. What would you respond to the Prophet on the Day of Judgment if he said that you killed my children? I said, this shocked me, but I was already so far in, I couldn't do anything about all these lives that had been lost. I left the old man. Everyone else, I had already killed them. He told this to his friend. He said, because of this, it doesn't matter what I do anymore. There's no more forgiveness for me. I've killed people in cold blood. I'm done. This friend of his came to Imam al-Rida. He said, Ya Imam al-Rida, Ya Abul Hasan, this is what my friend told me. You know what Imam al-Rida told him? Imam al-Rida told him he's done some of the worst sins that a human being can do, but he still cannot lose hope in the mercy of Allah. And then you and I, brothers and sisters, there is a sin we struggle with, we go back to it over, and then we say, is Allah going to forgive me this time? There's people who've done 10 times worse than you. And Imam al-Rida is saying, in that narration, he said, the sin of losing his hope might be worse than anything else he did. This is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doing things out of the fear of the consequences of my deed is a very spiritual thing to do. It is definitely part of our literature. It doesn't mean God is scary fundamentally. It means you are fearful of who you might become yourself. And if someone continues down this path, then he might reach a point sometime where in this life, he is so in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he has a glimpse of the type of fear that the Ahlul Bayt had in their hearts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That inshallah will bring tonight's talk to an end. Let us take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
فاطمة الزهراء صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
For the hastening of the reappearance of Imam Mahdi, أفلح من أعاد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. Before we begin our majlis, we share 3 small announcements, inshallah. First, we will be holding the second and final Q&A session with Sheikh Mahdi Rastani tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. before the English program, inshallah. Second, we will be hosting an 11th night Arabic program on Friday for those who wish to attend, and it will be at the same time as the usual Arabic program after Maghrib prayer. The English program will be the Maqtal only, which will be at 8 p.m. on Friday. And third, the Arabic Masra will be held this Friday at 9 a.m. Inshallah here at Jiray. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. It has been narrated in Wasa'il al-Shia that Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam once said, "Whomsoever sheds a tear of blood of ours that was shed, or women of ours who were abused, or over any of our Shia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant them rooms in heaven." Please join me in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to learn the rank of our Imam and our small dua. اللهم عرفني نفسك فإنك إن لم تعرفني نفسك لم أعرف رسولك. اللهم عرفني رسولك فإنك إن لم تعرفني رسولك لم أعرف حجتك. اللهم عرفني حجتك فإنك إن لم تعرفني حجتك ضللت عن ديني. Please help me welcome the reciter of the Husseini Majlis, Brother Hassan Bazoum, with a loud salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
ثانية على حب الزهراء. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before we begin, I would just like to take a minute to the brothers, the organizers asked me to just mention the issue of the building, and hopefully with the support of the brothers and sisters with us, we will be able to achieve our goals. So Taha Foundation, the mother organization of the Ashura project, and Al-Mustafa Scouts, has undertaken the task of purchasing and renovating a new community center that will be primarily focused on putting together projects for the youth, youth-centered projects, and also community projects. Now, when the Ashura project started many years ago, the program was smaller, the initiative was smaller, the sub-programs were smaller, but alhamdulillah, over the years, the program has only grown and has only expanded, and the capacity has grown and expanded, and the need has also significantly grown in the community. And also in regards to Al-Mustafa Scouts, 470 kids registered, 472 kids on the waiting list. Some of them have been on the waiting list for a long time. And this is due to manpower limitations and also facility limitations. So with this new project that the Taha Foundation has undertaken, there's a lot of potential to expand the programs and to extend more resources to the community. And I speak to the parents when I say this part, that we all have a responsibility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and before our 12th Imam Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif in doing the legwork and the hard work to preserve the identity and the faith of the future generations. And so from this aspect, we're asking that whoever is able to contribute, that they contribute in donations. And if a brother and a sister are not able to give financially, then if they can help with spreading the word and also securing maybe a family member or a friend who is able to give financially, because this project is essential. The target is for the youth. And inshallah, with the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what can be done in that new facility will be very beneficial. Not just for the Ashura project and the Mustafa Scouts, but also it will allow the expansion of the programs maybe to community members who are not directly involved with the Scouts or with the Ashura project, right? So to keep it very brief, but just to go over a few points, any donation you make is considered a nonprofit donation, 501c3. there is the option for you to donate by cash or check if you find one of the representatives. And you can also donate online, www.tahafoundation.org, and Venmo, or also Zelle, right? And I'm just listing, the methods of how one can donate, but ultimately it all comes down to us understanding the importance of putting something together like that. There's a massive attack on a Muslim identity, the moral identity, our community. We all have a task. The Shabab are doing the legwork. They're doing, the day-to-day, the planning, the initiative in the program is well studied. It's well planned. It's being executed properly. Anytime donation money comes in, it goes towards continuing the renovation. And the last point I would like to make is that, so I said when I spoke a few nights ago in the Arabic program, and I said that what's needed at this point now it's at $350,000, maybe a little bit less, but that that was needed by the end of the year. But truthfully, the money is needed for renovations, and the renovations have to be completed before the end of the year. So that means the money is needed even before, so that once the money is secured, the work is going to take time to be completed, right? So forgive me for interrupting the majlis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam to say these few words, but ultimately everything we're doing and that's being done is for the sake of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, and it's for preparing ourselves and also our kids for the coming Imam Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu al-Sharif. So this is why we found it befitting that we do speak about this. And to even make it easier, there are 2 signs outside that have a big QR code on it. You can scan it with your phone, or if you open up Zelle and Venmo, there's smaller QR codes where you can just directly scan those, and it will load the Taha Foundation's profiles on these 2 apps. وَعَظَّمَ اللَّهُ أُجُورَكُمْ. And thank you. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أحسنت. صح. So the respected Hajj is saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا. And this is indeed a project like that would be Sadaqah Jariyah. And the quick translation of the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Rasulullah, take from their money, and from the money of the mu'mineen, a charity that purifies their soul and elevates them. And the Hajj is mentioning that we, at least there are many verses in the Quran that we can, mention in this regards that would give inspiration. The Hajj, reminded me of this verse. And really, one thing that I do want to say is the reason why we don't, like, I'm doing this, and when I did it in Arabic and doing it now, the brothers were very hesitant that we do this. But right now there's a need. The reason why we don't pass out a basket is because we try as much as we can not to dilute the majlis of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein with these types of tasks. Although be it sometimes they are necessary, but we just, for the time being, we're asking that, you find someone that's a volunteer that you can ask for more information, find the QR codes, or find the website. Shukran Hajj. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To Karbala, let's take our hearts and souls to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى آلك المظلومين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا غريب يا شهيد كربلاء صلى الله عليك وعلى ريحانة المجتبى القاسم بن الحسن الشهيد بكربلاء. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, as you are Allah's vast mercy and the salvation of this ummah. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, and upon your brother Al-Hasan Al-Mushtaba and your nephew Al-Qasim, who was killed with you in Karbala. Yes, tonight in our majlis, we take our hearts to Al-Qasim, the son of Imam Al-Hasan. Qasim, Qasim, Qasim. We tell the story of a young man, the son of Hassan, in his uncle's camp, not afraid of death in a dreary land. He couldn't bear to see his uncle lonely, determined to defend Hussein bravely. He said to him, "Dear uncle, today I'm not a boy, I'm a warrior ready to slay. I fear no death, I fear no man. I only fear that in this place alone you're killed in gruesome ways." Then Qasim points to his sword. "Look, this sword that I hold with might to my father belonged, saved for this fight. I won't retreat from your side today. I'm not a boy, I'm a warrior ready to slay." Yes, when Al-Imam Al-Hasan alayhi salam was on his deathbed after he had been poisoned by Muawiyah and his agent, Imam Hussein alayhi salam was sitting next to him. And Al-Imam Al-Hasan Al-Mushtaba, his older brother, the second Imam, he says, "La yawmaka yawmika ya Aba Abdullah." He saw his brother Hussein saddened for what's befallen him. So he tells him, "There is no day like your day, ya Aba Abdullah. As 30,000 will march upon you from this nation, and they will kill you, and they will kill from your sons and from your family members, and they will take your woman captive, and they will carry your head across the land. So be patient, Aba Abdullah." Just like Rasulullah foretold of what will happen to Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala, Al-Imam Al-Hasan Al-Mushtaba also foretold of what will happen to his brother Hussein in Karbala. And even though Al-Imam Al-Hassan had been killed and he was not with his brother, he had 5 children, 5 boys that were with Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala. The first of them is called Abdullah Al-Akbar, and he was martyred in Karbala. And then there is Abdullah Al-Asghar, and we will go over his story when we recite the Masra' of the Imam, and he was also killed in Karbala. Then there was Amr ibn al-Hasan wal-Hasan al-Muthanna. One of them was spared because he was a little boy, and Al-Hasan al-Muthanna was injured but was left alive until after the battle ended. And then there is Al-Qasim ibn al-Hasan, the most known of Al-Imam al-Hasan's boys. Al-Qasim is an inspiration. Every time I look at the crowd and I see the young boys in the crowd, these handsome young men that are upcoming, something reminds me of Al-Qasim. Al-Qasim, although young, he was able to decipher the truth from falsehood, and he was brave as if he was a seasoned warrior himself. And in Karbala, he refused not to fight and to walk away from his uncle, knowing the calamity and the gravity of the situation. Before the battle, the night before the battle, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam sat his companions, and he told them that they will all be killed tomorrow, and he explained to them their sacrifice, and they refused to leave. Al-Qasim was listening to his uncle Hussein speak. And when the Imam finished his speech, Al-Qasim approached his uncle Hussein. Imagine 13, 14, maybe 15 years old. He says, Uncle Hussein, am I going to be amongst those who will be killed with you tomorrow? Imam Hussein alayhi salam looks at Al-Qasim's face. His nephew, who was entrusted to him by his brother Al-Hassan, his heart softens and he asks him, Dear Qasim, how do you view death? Al-Qasim responds, Fika ya amma ahla min al-asal. Uncle Hussein, death for your sake is sweeter than honey to me. Yes, on the 10th of Muharram, after the companions had been killed and Ali al-Akbar dueled and was martyred, Al-Qasim approached his uncle Hussein asking him for permission to fight. Yani Allah, how much faith, how much iman would a child at that age, a boy at that age, need to have for him to see what's happening in Karbala, the blades, the spears, the arrows, the javelins, the thirst, the heat, the horses. Yet he walks to his uncle and he says, Uncle Hussein, give me your permission to fight for you in Karbala today. Imam Hussein looks at Al-Qasim, he says, Ya ibn akhi, anta al-wadi'a. Dear Qasim, my nephew, you are entrusted to me by my brother Hassan. Yani he's refusing. Then Al-Qasim continues to plead with his uncle to let him fight. Imam Hussein alayhi salam says, Ya waladi atamshi ila al-mawt birijlik. Son Qasim, you're asking me to let you walk to your own death. Then he says, Wa kayfa la ya am. How can I not? Oh, Uncle Hussein, when you are by yourself, you have no one to support you nor help you. May my soul be sacrificed for you, Aba Abdullah. And he continues to plead with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and the Imam refuses, and Qasim walks away. And then after speaking with his mother encourages him. She tells him, do not leave your uncle. So he returns and he pleads again and again with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. When this happens, Al-Qasim comes to his uncle. Let me fight. Don't send me away. Uncle Hussein, let me fight with you today. My father Hassan would insist I fight. Uncle Hussein, please answer my plight. Let me earn an honor ever so grand. Qasim ibn al-Hassan, martyred with Hussein in this land. Yes, after the continuous pleads of Qasim with a heavy heart, our Imam granted Qasim permission to fight. But he told him, go bid farewell to your aunts, go bid farewell to your mother. So he goes to Zainab, then he goes to Ramla, his mother. He embraced her and he gave her his last farewell. He was happy. My uncle Hussein, Ya Ummah, has given me permission to fight in Karbala. He's wearing that honor like a crown. How would a mother feel in that situation? A mother would be sad, broken. She might urge him to stay. But the mothers in Karbala were resilient, just like the men who were warriors. To his mother he said, I'm leaving now. With Hussein I will fight till I die. She cried, then hugged and said with tears, proud I am, fight without fear. Don't leave your uncle until you bleed. But Ya Qasim, one more thing, Ya Qasim, when you go, huh? Dear son Qasim, one final thought. In your paradise, yani when you're killed and you go to heaven, in your paradise, make sure to recall your mother Ramla and Fatima's hall. Tell her with Hussein, Ya Zahra, my mother Ramla insisted I fall. Qasim entered the battlefield, saying, إن تنكروني فأنا نجل الحسن صبط النبي المصطفى والمؤتمن. If you do not know me, I am the son of Hassan, grandson of the chosen and trusted prophet. This is Hussein, like a ransomed captive amongst cursed people. May Allah never show them the sky's mercy. Yes, he fought fiercely. He was young in age but grand in his faith, and he drew his strength from his iman and his devotion to protecting Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he fought bravely and killed worthy opponents. One of the enemies who was in the battlefield narrates, he says, I was on the side of Umar ibn Sa'd's army when a young man came forward whose face would shine like the moon. And as he was wielding his sword, as he was fighting, the strap of his shoe became undone. And he says, I will never forget that it was his left shoe. Why? Because when the Qasim's shoe strap broke, He stopped back from the battlefield. The sand would burn his feet. So he stepped back. He wanted to fix his shoe. He bent down to fix the shoe. And one soldier says, by Allah, I will break his mother's heart. Then he rode towards Qasim and strung his sword and hit Qasim on the head with the sword. Qasim fell to the ground, calling, Adrikni ya Ammi. Imam Hussein alayhi salam rushed to his nephew's aid, breaking through the enemy's lines like an angered lion. When he reached Al-Qasim, how does he find Al-Qasim? A narration says he found him وَجَدَهُ يَفْحَصُ بِرِجْلَيْهِ, يعني he's shuffling his feet in the sand from the pain. Al-Hussein embraced Qasim. عز والله على عمك أن تدعوه فلا يجيبك أو يجيبك فلا يعينك. Ya Qasim, by Allah, it's hard upon your uncle that you call him and he can't answer you, or that he answers you but cannot help you, or that he helps you, or that he helps you but his help does not suffice you. يا قاسم حبيبي, to your side I came, heartbroken as you called my name. يا قاسم حبيبي, it's hard for me to see you bleed in the sand before me. Young you were, and I watched you grow. But today my heart bleeds hollow, as in Karbala you were slain. And as the Imam counseled Qasim passed away. رحم الله من نادى وقاسما وسيدا. One narration says that the Imam carried the body of Qasim back to the camp, but how? The narration says that when he carried him, he placed his chest upon his chest. And he carried him like this, as if even when Al-Qasim is dead, the Imam wants to embrace him. And when he brought him back to his side, where does he put him? He put him next to his son Ali al-Akbar. And for a brief moment he sat between them. On one side is Ali and the other is Qasim. جاب الخيمة عياله وحطه بصف علي الأكبر, وقعد ما بينهم يبكي وعليهم قام يتحسر. Then Ramla, the mother of Qasim, yes, his mother came. She wants to see her slain son, to embrace him for a final time. She sits over the body of Qasim, weeping in desolate agony, calling his name. Yalla, with Ramla. Qasim, Qasim, Qasim. Yumma, yumma. فتح عيونك لما يما أنا أريد لصدري ضمك. I'm a mother in Karbala mournful, my son slain before me, a day so awful. But this pain here I willingly bear, and for Hussein every soul will spare. Yes, the death of Qasim broke the heart of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And maybe in that moment Imam Hussein was searching for words that he would tell his brother Hassan why his son was killed in Karbala. But Sayyidi Aba Abdullah, what would Al-Hassan tell you? My brother Hussein, oh lonely Hussein, don't you grieve, don't you wail. Know that had I been there, I would defend you with my hands bare, and for your sake my life I'd spare. From my flame was Qasim's flare. He's made me proud, do not despair. My brother Hussein, oh lonely Hussein. أطفالهم بلغوا الحلم بقربهم، شوقا إلى الهيجاء إلى الحسناء. Ya Allah, we ask and call upon you by your greatest name, the mightiest, the most honorable, to send your blessings and praise upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and that you accept of us our worship. We ask that you send your mercy upon the dead of the believing men and women. We ask you by Hussein the martyr and his mother and father, whoever was in this gathering of ours and has a need, that you fulfill it for them, in particular those that have requested that we do dua on their behalf. We ask you, whoever in this gathering of ours and is sick or has a sick loved one, that you heal them and cure their ailments. We pray that you relieve the suffering of all those oppressed, and that you hasten the return of our beloved 12th Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah, and that you write our names amongst his supporters. We ask that you protect our scholars and maraja, and protect the Muslim ummah against evildoers. Assalamu ala al-Husayn وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين. Together. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على القاسم ابن الحسن المجتبى شهيدا مع الحسين. السلام على أبي الفضل العباس أخي الحسين. السلام على الحوراء زينب أخت الحسين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح الشهداء والعلماء ومن مات على ولاية مولانا علي بن أبي طالب، وإلى أرواح أموات الحضور لا سيما القائمين على هذا المجلس. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
10 years ago, we embarked on a mission to revive the true values of Islam within our community. Empowered by the faith and dedication of our volunteers and your endless support, our projects impacted the lives of tens of thousands in our community and beyond. Since day one, our effort was recognized as one being led by the youth, and the youth have always been at the center of our focus. Our goal was and remains to instill Islamic values that enlighten the young generation, strengthen their identity, and empower them to become successful leaders in the future. But as the times we are in become more challenging every day, and our values are consistently under attack, we cannot stand still, and having a facility that allows for bigger and better projects became a necessity. Alhamdulillah, today, Taha Foundation, the parent organization of the Ashura Project and Al-Mustafa Scouts, is pleased, honored, and excited to announce the next milestone in our journey. As of May 5th, we have completed the purchase of the upcoming Taha Foundation Community Center, a 48,000 square foot facility that has the amenities we need to improve and expand our programs, including a lecture hall, classrooms, a gym, and a spacious outdoor gathering area. While we are able to secure the purchase of this building, a lot of work is still required to transform it into the state-of-the-art facility that serves our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, more than ever, and for the sake of our kids and families, we're asking for your support in raising the funds needed for this project. Our fundraising target is $580,000 that will go towards renovations, repairs, furniture, and equipment. Your contribution, no matter how small, will make a significant difference. Join us as we embark on the next stage of our journey. With Allah's guidance and your support, we can empower the next generation of leaders and build a better future for our youth. Donate today.